What is up, everyone? Welcome back. We are finishing out the top 10 rankings that I've been doing for defensive players. This week, I'm going to talk about safeties or defensive backs. I kind of have a corner bias. So if you're looking for a wonderful nickel corner analysis or some sort of lockdown, shutdown guy, this is not the video for you. But I can assure you that if you have high caliber safeties in your dynasty IDP leagues or in your redraft IDP leagues, you will have a decided advantage against the competition. Safety is my favorite position on the defense. These are the most athletic players, I believe, on the entire defense. They are tasked to be fast enough to cover wide receivers, but have to be strong enough and more powerful than opposing offensive weapons so they can take them down to the ball. They are not only tasked with coverage against these high caliber and highly offensive receivers, but they are sometimes tasked to even sack the quarterback or apply run support or blitz. These are high caliber athletes. This is a very, very athletic position. And I've got 10 of what I believe are the best in the NFL, starting with number one. The number one player for me at this position is Antoine Winfield Jr. of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I believe this is a bit of a no-brainer in dynasty formats. I think you can argue a couple of other players as number one, but I think that Winfield right now is truly in his ascension to one of the best, if not the best player at the position currently for IDP football. Last season, he totaled over 130 total tackles. He had 12 defended passes, and he also had 6 sacks. You're not going to get much better than that from a player of his caliber. He's 25 years old. 25. The guy is just good at football. What else can you say about this? He just signed a very lucrative deal in the offseason. The Buccaneers are kind of in that will they, won't they contend in this division? It's a very ugly division, but I can assure you that one of the best players on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and for football and fantasy football purposes, is Antoine Winfield Jr. I believe that this season he will be in his prime. I think last season kind of showed us that he is the top guy at the position. I think that, like I said, at 25 years of age, he is going to be doing this for a long time. I believe that over the next 4 to 5 years, we are going to see some really high level talent. We're going to see some consistency, which is my favorite thing in IDP. But most importantly, what everybody likes, we are going to get some big boom plays. This guy does everything well. He can cover, he can have some interceptions, he can hit big enough to get forced fumbles. And like I mentioned earlier, he can sack the quarterback. There's not much better than Antoine Winfield Jr. The number two player on my list who could be argued as number one is Derwin James. Derwin James has been that guy his entire career, but the only reason I believe that he is number two is because he poses a bit of an injury risk. He played every game but one last season and was a star on the field. He had over 120 tackles. He had a couple sacks. He had some defended passes. But most importantly, he was consistent. When you're building a dynasty roster, you have to have guys you can anchor your team with. And Derwin James is the perfect player to do this because you know what you're going to get week in and week out. Last season, he showed us that he can still put together a full season without injuries. I know 1 week, but it was early in the year, so I'm going to act like it didn't happen. But Derwin James being on the field means points for your fantasy team. He's 27 years old, so he's still young in dynasty content wise, but I believe that we haven't seen the best of him yet. I think last season kind of showed us, okay, he's still in his peak, he's still in his prime, and I believe now with Jim Harbaugh going in there and really taking a chance by keeping Derwin James, because a lot of offseason rumblings were that he was going to be moved. I think that the fact that they kept Derwin James on this defense means he's going to be a focal point in building what Jim Harbaugh wants. And that is big news and great news for all Derwin James managers. And I believe that he is number two with a ceiling of potentially being number one. Number three on my list is the last guy that I would consider in this tier of players. And he also has a case for number one, and that is Kyle Hamilton of the Baltimore Ravens. I can't put him at number one because he's too young, but I don't blame you if you feel like he's the best moving forward. He's 23 years old and he plays for a Baltimore Ravens team that we know loves to have their defensive superstars. You think that Ed Reed was bad, and then we go through a transitional year, and then you get into the Kyle Hamilton in safety. You are doing something right as a team. Kyle Hamilton had big games, but they were mostly tackle games. He can defend passes pretty well, but outside of the defended pass here and there, he's basically a tackle guy. He had one game where he had 3 sacks, so you can see that there's an ability to do that, but I wouldn't plan to have him do anything other than give you that consistent floor. Because of this, I have him at number 3, but he also has a chance to go up to number 1 if he can build on this and he can show us that he can do those splash plays that we see with Winfield and Derwin James. But like I said, he's 23 years old. The guy was born in 2001. Say that out loud and tell me that that is not just bonkers to you. So he is still learning this NFL game. He's still growing into his NFL body. And I believe that this season, we could start to begin to see his peak athleticism and peak understanding of the game. And because of this, I have him at number 3. But again, I'm going to take the coward's way out here and say he absolutely could be number 1, but I just don't see it this year. Player number 4 on my list is Jessie Bates. The former Cincinnati Bengal was phenomenal since being on the field with Atlanta. And you actually can see a little bit of a dip in the Bengals secondary play as well with losing him. He is an absolute stat machine. Last season, he started the year with 10 tackles, 2 interceptions, and a forced fumble. That is the type of play you can get from this player. Now, you're not going to see that every single time he gets on the field, but he can absolutely pop off for some tremendous games when given the opportunity and at any given moment, depending on which team. He consistently had 8 or more tackles. He finished the season with over 130 tackles last year and had double-digit pass deflections. He also scored a touchdown if you're into that sort of thing. So the guy he's a playmaker. You know what you're going to get with him. The only reason I have him at number 4 is because I just feel like the other guys are kind of still ascending. Maybe Derwin James is kind of at the plateau, but I believe that Jessie Bates, we may start to see a dip in production or a plateau, and this is kind of what you're getting. But that's not at all a bad thing. He was a phenomenal IDP option last season, and just because I don't believe he's going to ascend does not mean that he is not worthy of a roster spot. He is not worthy of going and buying right now if you can. But if an owner is willing to sell you Jessie Bates, then I would try to take more assets off their team because that would flat out be a bad decision. Jessie Bates was, and will continue to be a good player for your team, but I have him at number 4 because I think we know what we're getting with him. And I think if you can get this same season again, it's a bonus, but don't be shocked if the stats dip a little bit this season going into year 27 of his life. Jessie Bates at number 4. Number 5 on my list is a familiar name for most IDPs, but is probably not as high on dynasty rankings as I have him. And that is IDP legend Budda Baker of the Arizona Cardinals. Budda Baker is flat out only going to tackle the ball, but he does it better than most linebackers, and especially better than every linebacker and defensive player on his team. That is the type of player I want on my roster. A guy that I know I'm going to put him in my lineup and he is going to give me enough to keep me in contention, but with weeks that will splash and win the matchup. He's 28 years old, so we're starting to creep up into spooky territory with age and dynasty. But just because he's high 20s does not mean he's in the 30s. So stop rounding up when you see these ages and understand that we saw him in a season where he missed 6 games have almost 100 tackles. He missed 6 total games and still almost had 100 tackles. We are at the point in time now where you need to monitor these injuries, which is why I have him at number 5 and not in that top tier of players. But I believe we're also going to see a revitalized Arizona Cardinals team this year. Because of this, I believe that more players will be bought in, more players will be locked in, and we will see an uptick in most players on their team. It's a lot like when you see a band that nobody's ever heard of and they start to make it to the big time, and you can be that guy that sits there and goes, "Oh, hey man, I knew them when they were playing that show in the garage, or I knew that when they were playing that smoky old bar room." That's how I feel like the Arizona Cardinals will be this season. So I'm buying as many players offensively and defensively as I can, but understanding that each player has a unique price point that I need to get at. So before I bore you with all the semantics on that, just understand this. Buda Baker was, and is still a good player. He's not going to do these big pick sixes or forced fumbles or pass deflections, but he is going to be in the box, ready to take down the ball carrier or ready to smoke a receiver going on a slant. Buda Baker will be a good player for your team, and he is still a dynasty buy at 28 years old. The sixth player on my list is a player that I just can't quit. Minkah Fitzpatrick of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Minkah Fitzpatrick is one of those players where if you have him on your team, you are either extremely happy or extremely frustrated with little in between. Please take it from me, a manager of Minkah Fitzpatrick in way too many leagues. Minkah, I just don't really see the I don't really see why people are selling him at such a high clip or are not investing in him at this current price. Minka is one of those guys that gets hurt. I don't know if you can have a causation or a correlation with will this guy get injured more since he's been injured before. But what I can tell you is it's happened. So you need to be aware of that before rostering him. He is not a player I would build around, but he is absolutely somebody I would want on my roster. You have to be willing to put your chips in the middle to win fantasy football. You cannot have a pretty on paper team. You got to have guys that are boom or bust because the chances are they're going to boom the weeks you don't play them and bust the weeks you do, right? Don't think like that. Put a guy like Minkah in your lineup as your second or third safety and be prepared for the wave, whether it's a wave of points or a wave of injury. This league has a funny way of working out. Minkah Fitzpatrick is number 6 on my list. Although I'm telling you to play him as a second or third safety, he's number 6 because there are not guys in the league that can pop off and score like him. Minkah Fitzpatrick only played in 10 games last season, but in 3 of those, he eclipsed 11 tackles. That type of talent doesn't often happen, especially at the safety position. That type of ability is what you have to rank a player like him on. And that's why I've got him at number 6. He absolutely, at one point in time, could have been the best player at this position, but we have to rank him appropriately. And over the past couple of seasons, he's been a bit of a disappointment. And I'm not going to just ignore that or put it under the rug. But I believe he can win you weeks. And a player like that deserves to be in the top 10. My number 7 player is a guy who surprised me a little bit last year, and that is Jaquan Brisker of the Chicago Bears. The Bears are another team similar to the Arizona Cardinals where I believe we need to start buying stock now on them because this time next year, I believe they could be the talk of the league on both sides of the ball. Brisker is on a very underrated defense, and he is a big part of this defense. He is a typical safety you're going to see. He's not going to pop off and he's not going to sack the quarterback often, although he did get to the quarterback 2 separate times for a half sack each. He had 9 defensive passes, and he also had over 100 tackles in season number 2. I think he's going to be one of those guys we're going to see ascend even more. And while you look at his stats, you may think, okay, average player. I don't believe he's just average. I think we're going to see him start to get into his groove and start to hit his stride. And dare I say, hit his peak as the Chicago Bears start to hit their peak. But you have to understand that this guy is only in year 3. So we're going to see a little bit of ups and downs. We're going to see some inconsistencies, and we might even see some competition. But I don't believe any of these things are bad. I think when you have a player that's young like him, who's starting to ascend and start to make a name for himself in a role, you absolutely have to take a chance on a guy like this. He's young enough that you can build around him without having to really worry about capital investment for him. I think he's a lesser known name, which also gives you a bit of a competitive advantage if you scout him. The main issue I have with his game at this point in time, which is why I have him ranked on the back half of my top 10, is I don't feel like we get a lot of consistency. We get a lot of peaks and valleys, we get a lot of mountains. And while the highs are high, the lows are just kind of meh. And for a guy that you're trying to build around in Dynasty, that worries me. But like I've said previously in this video, he's only going into his third season. So we should see more consistent play now. We should see these highs and lows kind of meet in the middle a little bit, hopefully more on the high side. And I think that we'll still consistently see him break up passes and maybe even get interceptions and forced fumbles at a higher clip this next couple seasons. So if you are in Dynasty, I would look to buy Jaquan Brisker now, which is why I have him at number 7 on my list. Number 8 on my list is going to make Dynasty managers cringe. So I apologize ahead of time because I have a 30-year-old in my list. Spooky time. It is Kevin Byard. Kevin Byard is also on the Chicago Bears, which is another reason why I like him and Brisker. You have to understand that Kevin Byard is what he is. He's a tackle guy. So you're going to get very, very high caliber tackles. He spent many years atop the safety position in IDP. And while I don't believe he's going to hit safety 1 or safety top 5, I do think that he's still credible enough to build on your team and to have as an option for IDP. I think he will benefit Jaquan Brisker, and Jaquan Brisker will benefit from having him as well. I think both of these guys are the perfect complement to one another. You have Kevin Byard, who can stand back there and be the stalwart of the defense. He can be a little bit more of a veteran mentor. I know that's such a cliche thing, but it's a real thing in the NFL. And I think Brisker can be that playmaking, learn on the job type of player who can be a little bit more free. And maybe this season we see the uptick in stats. But just because one player could uptick and the other one could level out does not mean that Kevin Byard is a bad player. As a matter of fact, last season he had over 120 tackles and he had a few defended passes as well. So we're not getting the big plays we used to get out of him when he was younger and when he was hitting the safety 1, safety 2 mark. But Kevin Byard is still a guy you can have on your roster and win games. And he's one of my favorite types of players, the guy that won't lose your matchup. He had one game last season where he had 2 solo tackles. That was it. Other than that, he's had pretty good games. 15 of his 17, he had 5 or more tackles. And honestly, when you need a floor player, he's the perfect type of guy. So don't let that 30 in front of his name or in front of his year he was born, don't make that make you nervous. Understand he's still a good player. He will be a good player for your team. Although he might be on the downtick, it's not too late to get him on your roster and have him help you win games. Kevin Byard, the ageless wonder, at number 8. You guys want to get weird? At number 9, I have a player that maybe people don't know a whole lot of unless you're a diehard IDP like me. And that is Javon Holland of the Miami Dolphins. Now, before you start crucifying me or yelling at me in the comments because of a who the heck is this guy take, I want you to look at his stats opening last season. He started off the year with 14 total tackles. Second game, he had 11 tackles and a pass defended. And then he followed it up week 3 with 7 solo tackles, 3 forced fumbles, and a defended pass. If you have the ability to not only have double-digit tackles, but then follow it up with a 3 forced fumble game, what else can you do with given another opportunity in another year in the system? He also had a pick 6 last season, but he got hurt. And as we do with all players that get hurt, we ignore them, we forget about what was, and we think about what's now going to be. He's not a broken player. He's still young. He's 24 years old. He had a career year the previous season, and he got hurt this year on way to another career year. But we are going to overthink this, and I strongly caution you not to. Javon Holland is a guy who you could probably get cheap, and he is going to pay dividends early. He's got huge star potential. And I think that the Miami Dolphins are just, they need a defensive star like you need water in the desert. Is it going to be the pass rush? They've invested a lot of money in the pass rush on this defense. If that's the case, great. That will help the secondary. If the quarterback can't just sit in the pocket and fire darts, fire bullets on the defense, if he has to throw off rhythm, if he has to make split second decisions, you are going to see the secondary and the linebackers improve statistically because they're going to have more opportunities at defended passes. They're going to have more opportunities for interceptions. We're going to have more opportunities for forced fumbles or ball knockouts. And that is where I believe that Javon Holland can step up and improve this season. But you have to be willing to take a little bit of a chance on a player that we don't know a whole lot of. He did get hurt, but he was coming off a career year and was improving on those stats prior to that. I think he's going to be fine. And I think the Miami Dolphins are still a team you should buy in on all sides of the ball. Number 9, Javon Holland. And rounding out my list is probably the statistical best player from last season at the position, Cameron Bynum of the Minnesota Vikings. I was shocked that this guy came what I felt like was out of nowhere. In many leagues that I was in, he sat on waivers till week 2 or 3. So I think that consensus was kind of like, all right, are you really this good? Well, he started off the season with 10 tackles and then followed it up week 2 with 15. And he did not look back. Last season, he had over 140 total tackles and 9 defended passes. Harrison Smith may never retire. And I love the guy, but somebody eventually has to take that job from him. And I think last season was the first time that we got a confirmation that the next dude is here. The only reason I have him this low, I got to see it again. I have to see it more than once. There have been many players who have put together one great, phenomenal season and then have petered out. His stats were so eye-popping that I feel forced to put him in the top 10. Not a bad thing either. He's a good player. I need to see it a second year in a row. The Minnesota Vikings have supported one of the best players at the position for over a decade in Harrison Smith. Harrison Smith is one of those guys who always was around the ball and he always created big plays. But as we see him get older in age, we're starting to see him pass this baton, and Bynum is taking it. It's a very cheap and easy analysis to say, well, when this player retires or this player leaves and the other guy steps in, the stats are going to be the same because the position's the same. And while I do believe that's cheap and not good analysis, IDP a lot of times is predicated on statisticians. And when a team has a statistician, it's all the difference between a solo tackle and an assisted tackle. And that, in most cases, is a half a point difference. So you are going to have an opportunity to remain consistent in that department. And we already saw Bynum have over 140 tackles, like I previously mentioned. So I think that he has an opportunity to grow a bit, but I think that we might have seen the peak year, and that scares me because if you see the peak year, unless you consistently put it together and it becomes the plateau, at this level, that's super high level, and he's safety 1 next year. But if he dips, is it regression? Was last year a freak year? That type of analysis makes me nervous. But if he has a plateau at 140 tackles, there's not many people better in this league. I don't care who gets the forced fumbles or the sacks. I don't care who gets the interceptions. 140 tackles will win you weeks. He had weeks of 12 tackles, 9 tackles, 11 tackles, 15 tackles. He did it all. So get a player like him on your team and be willing to take the growing pains a little bit because I still believe they're there. He was relatively unknown till last season, and he splashed. And that is a good thing. But be wary when you build up around a player who's only had 1 year. I like to watch him prove it, and that's why he's number 10 on my list. Thank you, everybody, as always, for watching these videos. I hope you like the new getup. I really put a lot of work in here. Shout out to my wonderful fiance for helping me get all this taken care of. It's finals week, so I had to rock the Luka jersey for the Mavericks. Thank you, as always, for watching the videos. Comment what you like. Comment what you hate. If you hate my stupid football cards in the background, that's fine. If you love the fact that I took a risk on a safety, great. If you hate the fact I don't like corners, just tell me what you want. Tell me what you like and dislike, and maybe I'll banter with you in the comments, or maybe not. Maybe I'll make fun of you to my friends. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you subscribe to the page. Follow me on all the socials at MattMontyFF. And as always, God bless you and God bless your family. Thank you very much.